I'm Alan Baxter and I write horror. Mostly, that's the easiest and quickest way to do it. It's a lot of fantasy, crime, mystery, and stuff all sort of mixed in. A lot of dark fantasy, but yeah, horror's my kind of bread and butter. Yeah.
What drew you to writing in the first place?
I don't know, quite frankly. I just always have. I always told stories. I did a lot of role playing, and sort of scratched the itch by doing a lot of DMing for D&D and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I don't know. I've always just been drawn to it. I can't really tell you what it was. I've always been an avid reader, and I guess I thought I could do it as well.
Well, a lot of people love your book, so you're obviously doing something
Well,
right.
thanks. Thanks. Yeah, I'll do my best.
What's your process for your writing your books? Does it change between series or books, or is it pretty much the same?
Um, I mean, it's largely the same. I've been doing this for a while now, I suppose. So I mean, every book is different, every story is different to some degree, but really the process of getting it down and getting the first draft done and finish and all that largely stays the same, unless I run into problems, which happens sometimes.
Are you a plotter or a pantser?
Both and neither. It's a weird one. A lot of people sort of look at that as kind of like a binary choice. You either do one or the other, but it's a bit more of a sliding scale. Um, Sometimes I go into something with absolutely no idea what I'm doing. I've just normally a story for me is normally more than one idea, like two, three ideas all start sort of orbiting each other, and then they crash together, and they're okay, we got a story forming here. Sometimes that will happen, and I'll just start with no idea where it's going. Sometimes I'll know how I want to end a story, but not how to get there. Often as I'm going through, sort of halfway through, I'll start to see the bigger picture, and then I'll start making some notes and planning a bit more how I'm going to get to the end of it because I can see it a bit more then. That just tends to be more often than not what happens. But yeah, and then half the time, I might plan something and think I know what's going to happen, and then as I start getting to the end, it completely changes. So the story rules, always follow the story.
Do you normally have an idea who your characters are, or do you sort of have to do like a character sheet to really get to know your characters before
It
writing?
depends. Like when, like I was saying, sometimes, a story is several ideas coming together. Sometimes one of those ideas might be a character. There's a particular character that I really want to get. That would be a great character to write. In which case, no problem. But otherwise, normally characters kind of form loosely, and as I'm writing, they kind of coalesce a bit more. And I keep a notes file for characters, and I every time something relevant to a character crops up, I add it to the file. So the character sheet sort of grows in the process of writing it. I rarely do that at the start, and some characters are a bit more formed when they appear, but usually they grow in the process of writing.
What's your approach to world building?
A lot of my stuff is set here and now. So like I've got like there's the Alex Kane trilogy, for example, which is a sort of a dark urban fantasy, and that in the second and third book that goes to completely different worlds. It goes to the completely sort of second world fantasy stuff. So that required a lot more actual world building, but otherwise, a lot of my stuff tends to be set here, and it's about getting the realism and the sort of minutiae of all the real stuff correct,
Yeah.
and authentic and convincing, so that people go along for the ride. And then when all the weird and supernatural and whatever else starts coming along, people stay with it. So and I think it's the same when you're making completely new worlds, science fiction, fantasy, whatever. It's the everyday detail. You get that stuff right, and you build that authentically, and not by telling, but just through the characters and what they're doing. The rest of it can't. I think Le Baron was said, get the little stuff right, and I'll follow you off the cliff, something along those lines. Yeah.
And it's always like the day-to-day things that characters do, like if there's a gardener or something in the
Yeah, you need that's it.
world.
You need cleaners and gardeners and stuff in your world. You need people to have lives. Another really great tip I got early on when I was writing was the best stories are when something else is happening too.
Yep.
So don't focus so hard on the story that you want to tell, but the other stuff that's going on. People might be going through a messy divorce. Somebody might have an ailing relative or child they have to look after, or there's real life stuff that is always going on. So when you're telling your story, remember that all those people, all those characters have real life stuff too, and seed that in, and that helps to build the world as well as to build the characters.
Do you have favorite moments to write in your stories, like any particular scenes that are sort of similar across your books to write?
Not really. I try to keep like I hopefully by now I've sort of got a voice and a style to some degree, and I would like to think that a lot of the time people will pick up something because it's an Alan Baxter book. They know that sort of what they're getting to some degree. But equally within that, I sort of want each one to be different. I don't want to be repeating myself too much if possible. A lot of my stuff tends to deal with justice and injustice and consequences and all those sorts of things. Those bigger themes are pretty common. But otherwise, I like to surprise myself with different stories and try to, if I can surprise myself what I'm writing, then hopefully readers don't get bored.
Yeah, it doesn't become a cliche.
That's it. Yeah, yeah.
Do you have a favorite character or a character you relate to from one of your books the most?
Oh, wow. Not especially. I mean, I mentioned the Alex Kane series earlier. That's a trilogy. And the main character of Alex Kane is a very sort of successful underground cage fighter. So he's first and foremost a martial artist. And that's my other life, my day job. I've been a teacher and practitioner of Kung Fu for just forever. So I got to explore, like, Alex Kane isn't me, a different sort of character, but I got to put a lot of that martial philosophy and stuff that is very close to my heart. I got to explore that through his character there. So I think I've always got a bit of a soft spot for Alex Kane because I got to be a real martial arts nerd through that character. So that was cool. But otherwise, yeah, beyond that, I don't really have favorites. I think I more have favorite moments with characters than characters in particular.
Has writing and publishing books changed the way you see yourself?
It's an interesting question. I don't know. I mean, there was a time when I really wanted to be able to tell stories and I really wanted to be a published author. And now I am. But so in that respect, I suppose I do see myself a bit differently, but equally, like there's, and I've talked to other people about this, it doesn't matter what you achieve, you always want something more. There's no actual success because it's like, well, yeah, I've done this now, but I haven't done that. Or, I got that award, but I haven't got that one. And so there's always something you're striving for. And I feel like that's what I've always been doing. So I don't really see myself any differently other than the fact that I'm just still doing this thing and still trying to get better at it. Yeah.
Are there any books or authors that inspires you when you're writing in particular?
By far, my biggest influence is Clive Barker. I'm a huge Barker fan. I grew up reading mostly a lot of fantasy and the big fat fantasy trilogies when I was quite young, and then when in my very early teens, probably 12 or 13, too young really, I discovered horror like James Herbert and Ramsey Campbell and those sorts of things. And that's when my sort of um, reading horizons really broadened. But it was Clive Barker who really blew me away when I was, reading the Books of Blood and Hellbound Heart and stuff like that, and Cabal. And that's more what I try to do. That sort of dark fantastic that's got the horror and the fantasy and the weird and all those things mixed together. And so, yeah, I think, and he's still to this day probably my favorite author. So.
It's always good to find an author that like sticks with you and like you're inspired to be in your writing as well.
Yeah, that's it. Sometimes people say, what book do you wish you'd written? Which always struck me as a strange question because we can all only write the books that we can write. But I want to have written books that make people feel the way Clive Barker books make me feel. That's what I'm striving for. Yeah.
What advice would you give to a writer working on their first book?
Finish it. It seems really contrite, but not contrite, trite. But the two hardest things about writing a book are starting it and finishing it. So
Yeah.
you've got to get going in the first instance, and there's a million excuses to stop doing that. So that's the first hardest thing. And then once you've started, keep going until you get to the end. Even if it's rubbish, it will be rubbish. It's a first draft. All our first drafts are rubbish. But once you've got a whole first draft, once you've got a story, you can edit it and make it good. So those are by far the two hardest things: getting started and getting finished. Once you've done those two, the rest is gravy.
You can always edit.
That's it. You can edit something that exists. You can't edit something that doesn't exist. It's not there. That's it.
What's the most important lesson you've learned as an author?
Patience, probably, because this industry is slow and
Yep.
so much doesn't happen. Like the only thing we control is the writing, that we do that. That's the thing we've got control over. We can write what we want to write. After that, trying to get an agent, trying to get published, hoping something happens, and then it doesn't happen, and then you wait again. You've got to have a really thick skin. You've got to accept that most of what you do will get rejected, and you have to keep plugging away at it. And you have to just have that patience. You have to be determined and thick-skinned, but patience is probably what it's taught me, because I'm an impatient person. I want results. Let's go. Let's go. I want this. I want this. That's the next thing. That's the next thing. And I constantly have to just sit back and wait.
Yeah. I think a lot of people struggle with patience.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Certainly not something unique to me.
No. How do you stay connected with your readers?
It's a difficult one. Like catching up with you at Comic Con and stuff like that is always a great one because, I spend most of my time in here.
Yeah.
And so being able to get out to those sorts of events is really good. It's a privilege and I really enjoy it, getting to actually meet people in person. I always take those opportunities when they come along. But otherwise, social media can be a curse, but it is absolutely a blessing in that respect, in staying in touch, letting people know. And so, I've got a newsletter that people can sign up for. I've got a Patreon where there's extra stuff. People can get all kinds of stuff there that they don't find otherwise. And I get to chat to people and Zoom. There's some levels on Patreon, people can Zoom like this directly with me. Or just through Blue Sky and Instagram and those sorts of things, just being able to stay in touch and share news of what's going on, and also get that news from readers and from other writers, because I'm a reader and a fan first and foremost as well. So yeah, it's I social media it can be draining, but it's a net benefit, I reckon.
There's a fine line between it being helpful and not helpful. So
Yeah, yeah, it's important to curate your feeds. I
yeah.
block and mute with abandon. I've got no concerns on that, because like if I wouldn't let someone in my house sort of thing, or I wouldn't want them in my lounge room talking that way, then they're not going to sit in my social media feed talking that way. That's my kind of philosophy. But if you curate your feed and you sort of make sure that you don't feel like you're too committed to it, so you can step away and just have real life and stuff, then yeah, then it's good. There's a benefit to it, definitely.
Definitely. Do you have a favorite writing snack or drink? It's a very random question.
Coffee in the morning, tea in the afternoon, whiskey in the evening.
Fair
I'm very much a coffee person in the morning, and by the time it gets after lunch, I tend to drink cups of tea. And if I'm in the evening, I really enjoy good single malt whiskey, and quite often I might be in here, not usually drafting at that point, but if I've got edits to do or I've got stuff to read through, I've got notes and stuff. Then sitting here with a dram going through that stuff of an evening is not unusual.
Good way to encourage yourself to sit down and do it as well.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly. Yeah, rewards.
Do you play music while you write? And if you do you have favorite music to listen to?
Not always. And it kind of depends. Like, I have a 10-year-old. So if I'm home alone, quite often I enjoy the silence,
Yeah.
because when I'm not alone, there is rarely silence. So in those situations, I will quite often put on headphones. And even sometimes when I'm alone, I get the urge to have music on in the background while I'm working, but it has to be stuff that I can't hear the lyrics, or I can't, if I recognize the lyrics, it kind of pulls me out of focus. But I'm a big heavy metal fan. So I listen to a lot of heavy metal that's got less than clear vocals. But I listen to a lot of movie and game soundtracks too. I find those really good, as writing background music, and especially if I'm trying not to be distracted from, other people around, put the headphones on, have a good soundtrack running, and just zone. That's good.
Even while I'm reading, I have to have something in the background. But if I'm watching a show, it has to be a show that I've already watched, so I don't pull
So
my
you don't
focus
get
from the book.
distracted. Yeah, that's a talent. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite horror movie or director?
Yes, I mean there's a handful that sort of cycle around. I've probably seen The Thing more than any other horror movie. John Carpenter's The Thing. Carpenter is probably is a favorite director in that respect. Event Horizon is another one, and Alien is another. And why they've all got that science fiction edge, I don't know, because I don't write science fiction horror particularly. But those three movies are just perennial favorites for me. So yeah, Ridley Scott, John Carpenter, you tend to really enjoy in that respect.
And my final question, who is your biggest supporter?
Um, Realistically, probably my wife, who puts up with it, because she gets it and knows what I do and supports the fact that I do it, which is awesome. It can be difficult for creative people if they have a sort of non-creative partner who finds it, why can't you just get a job, work 9 to 5, get a fixed wage, make good money? And it's like, because that just destroys my soul. So in that respect, absolutely, my wife is an amazing supporter because she like facilitates it. I wouldn't be able to do it if she didn't back it. But otherwise, every single person who buys a book, or reads a book, talks about one of my books, anything like that, are the great supporters, because a career like this doesn't exist without readers, and the only way readers grow is other readers recommending it. I can sit here online or do anything, talk about my stuff as much as I like, and will only have a small impact. But readers who enjoy the work telling other people, I love this and you should read it, that's absolute genuine magic to build an author career. Nothing works like that. So those people are the real supporters of keeping the career going.
It's always important to share the books and authors that you love, because otherwise, no one else will hear it,
Yeah,
really.
that's it. I'm a big proponent of, if you don't enjoy something, just don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Just let it go, it doesn't matter. And if you do enjoy something, tell everyone, because the more, it is so hard to get noticed in this business. It's so hard to build a readership, and there's constant noise around with so many other distractions. And when enough people start saying, no, this is good, you should read it, that's like ripples on a pond, and that has an effect on a career that is incalculable. That's the difference between being able to keep doing this or not, really.
Yeah,
Mm.
definitely. Everyone needs to just talk about the books they love instead
Yeah,
of, pulling people down.
yeah, absolutely that.